The lights in the house were off. I wondered if she had gone to sleep while I was out. It had only been about 30 minutes since I had walked out on her in the middle of a heated argument. Not 6 months into our marriage, and I already needed a break from the all-craziness that had been escalating more and more recently. I had jumped in the car to take a drive around town to calm my nerves. Driving always helped me calm down. It was peaceful, especially at this time of night. As I unlocked the door and stepped into the house, the mini kitchen light came on, and I could hear angry breathing coming from the kitchen. The house we lived in was a standard-sized Japanese compact house. The entrance connected to the mini living room, that connected to the even smaller kitchen, that connected to the bathroom. There were no corridors connecting any rooms. It would be impossible to sneak into the house unnoticed if someone were on the ground floor, even with the TV running. Not only could you see anyone entering the house, but you would unmistakably hear them. I wasn't trying to sneak though. "Hello? Honey?" I called nervously. There was no answer, but the angry breathing continued. I wondered whether she had been standing in the kitchen the whole time, waiting for me. That's where I had left her when I walked out, telling her I needed a break from all the yelling. The hairs on my arms and neck stood up in terrified anticipation for what might be coming next. As I removed my shoes and stepped into the living room, I could see her silhouette standing in front of the kitchen light, almost exactly where I had left her. "Honey?" I called again nervously. As I stepped closer towards the kitchen, there was a flash of steel from the silhouette. I froze in the kitchen doorway. She had a large kitchen knife in her hand. The kind of knife used for chopping vegetables. A knife that could do severe damage to any man. Admittedly, I am almost twice her size, and a good foot and a bit taller than her, but it was my upbringing that would prevent me from touching her. You see, as a little child, I had seen my father beat, slap, and punch my mother any number of times. My mother would curse my father and would tell me to never, ever, ever, ever hit a woman. In my life, I have never thrown the first punch against anyone, unless it was my older brother, as brothers do. And I had never ever laid a hand on a girl. Not even Peta, who had taken her pound of flesh from me on my 6th birthday. If you must know, I was a chatty boy who could talk your ear off. Skinny as a stick, but with more energy and courage than you could imagine. And more accident-prone than any mother deserves. Peta was the queen of 1st grade. She was the center of attention on every occasion. However, this was my birthday party at my house, with my mother in charge, who made sure I was in the spotlight. My mother didn't dislike Peta in any shape or form, but didn't overly like her either. Try as she might, the focus never remained on Peta for more than a moment. Then she got hold of my mother's butter knife. Perhaps it's better to say it was a knife that my mother used for butter. It had a dirty yellow handle and a curved end like a table knife. It was not serrated, but had a smooth finish and was as sharp as any knife, including the one my wife was now holding in the kitchen. You couldn't stab anyone with it because the end was blunt, though you could most definitely cut someone with it. It may have been a kind of knife-looking spatula that my mother decided to sharpen as a method of protection. I don't really know. Now Peta only wanted to tell me off. To tell me not to be so selfish. After all, I wasn't the only person at my birthday party. There were other people deserving of attention, like herself. She took me to the side, away from everyone, and was going to tell me off, while tapping me with the knife as you would a stick. Yet, instead of tapping, she cut a sizable gash in my upper arm. As soon as she cut me, she gasped while dropping the knife, and cupping her hands over her mouth. My quick thinking had me pick up the knife before all the commotion began.
Pauley! What have you done?
My mother shrieked. I accidentally cut
Myself?
I explained in a very believable tone, while holding the knife.
I can't take my eyes off you, for even a second, now can I, you silly boy?
My mother scolded. My mother, a nurse, and always with a med kit on hand, just for such emergencies, never gave Peta a single thought. She stitched me up, with 6 stitches, in no time, and never let me out of her sight, for the rest of the day. I had successfully directed any suspicion away from Peta onto myself. And she did a good job of telling everyone what I had apparently done to myself. But here, now, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, with the sound of that angry breathing coming from my wife, a fear like no other came over me. What's more, the knife was not directed at me. She held the knife against her own left wrist, pressed so hard that any movement in either direction would do irreparable damage. A vision of her dead, in minutes, flashed through my mind. I couldn't see her face, but the light caught the edge of her left eye that sparkled menacingly. I half expected her to lunge at me, and I knew if she did, I would be no more. But what happened next was more terrifying than anything you could possibly imagine.
Don't you dare walk out on me again.
She growled in a low voice. It was a kind of controlled, calculated, calm of a growl that would terrify even the most toughest of tough guys.
Don't you dare.
She breathed in a whisper.
You think I am so stupid as to hurt you?
Her calm rage nearly liquefied my bones. It was sheer will that kept my legs from buckling from under myself. It was complete terror that had me frozen in my feet.
I'm not going to hurt you, no. I won't touch you at all.
She continued.
I will cut my wrists and bleed out all over the floor. I will stage everything in such a way that you will be framed for my death. There will be no doubt that you butchered me. The police will arrest you for my murder, and you can enjoy being raped in prison until the day they execute you. Your life will be over.
In that moment, my whole life flashed before my eyes. The picture she painted was so crisp, so fresh, so real, there is no way you could not imagine it. I saw her, the image of her blood, everywhere. I envisioned how she would beat herself with some object to make it look like I had beaten her. I imagined the heated screams of her faking an attack on herself. And I could imagine how, on an unsuspecting day, that I would walk into the house to see her all bruised and bleeding and in complete frozen shock, watch as she placed the knife in my hand and stabbed and sliced herself up, while her blood splashed all over me, sealing her fate and mine. Best case scenario, she would live, and I would rot in prison like she suggested. Worst case scenario, what she said would come to pass.
You know, I would make it happen. You are in my country, not yours. The police would never believe a gaijin like you, even if I decided to cut you up instead. But no, my way is more satisfying. You know, I would get away with it.
It's not a matter of could for her, it's a would. And by God, I knew she would. I knew it in every horrified fiber of my being. Amy Dunn from the movie Gone Girl is a saint compared to this woman.
Don't you dare walk out on me again.
Came the hiss from the woman who promised to love me, in sickness, and in health, forsaking all others, for as long as we both shall live. Both. For as long as we both shall live. However short that might turn out to be, should I ever disobey her again? This was the first time I realized that I was seriously in trouble.
Tom put down his coffee mug and let out a long, whispered. He stared into his nearly empty coffee mug. The raw fear of Pauley's tale tasted so real in his mouth as he sat next to his buddy, his mate, his best friend, Pauley. The fear tasted so real because Tom was also in a similar predicament, if you could call it that.
Life is always stranger than fiction. You just can't make this shit up, can you?
Tom said quietly.
I feel for you, bro. I really do.
And he did. Tom had been witness to that same level of malice. The constant cutting off of Pauley in mid-conversation. The constant control over his words in what he was allowed and not allowed to say. From a bystander's point of view, she might look like an excited woman wanting to communicate to Pauley's friends in English. There weren't that many opportunities for a non-English married woman to speak to someone in English. So one might forgive, even ignore, the constant interruptions and shooting down of Pauley in mid-conversation with his friends. The few friends he was allowed to have, that is. Tom knew the feeling all too well. It was like Pauley was Tom, and Tom was Pauley. The horrific words that tumbled awkwardly out of Pauley's mouth during these few precious moments of free time with Tom rang so real. It tasted so real. Tom and Pauley's tales and stories were as similar could be. Tom looked over at Pauley as he stared blankly out the window of the coffee shop, his head resting on his trembling hands. His hands trembling from the fear of reliving that terrifying moment that sealed the rest of his life. Tom felt awkward looking at Pauley. He could feel the fear and resignation radiating from Pauley's core. His friend looked exhausted, as if a good night's sleep was a distant memory to Pauley. Some acquaintance he once knew from long ago, before the illusion of a happy marriage wore off. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of a restless sleep that came with a never-ending barrage of nightmares that plagued his dear friend. Tom knew the feeling all too well. His own marriage had its own shocking reveal. A rude awakening most foul, like being woken up after being thrown in an ice bath, pajamas and all. A memory so burned into his mind, it would drive almost anyone to insanity. And yet, sane, Tom remained. If not for Pauley, then for his beloved children.
My name is Pauley, and I am a battered spouse.
Pauley whispered to no one in particular, as he buried his face in his hands.
It's been 15 days since the last threat on my life.
Tom almost spurted out his coffee as he was taking a sip. Sounded just like some kind of Addictions Anonymous catchphrase. Tom ran those words through his own mind.
It's been 14 days? Wait. Is it 15 or 14? No, wait, it's actually been 15 days. 15 since my wife last threatened my life.
Tom shook his head. The thoughts pounded in his mind like a sledgehammer.
I feel you, brother.
Tom said sympathetically, patting Pauley's shoulder. As he looked over his friend, Tom caught the familiar shape of a scar on Pauley's arm. With his head buried in his hands, Pauley's light blue short-sleeved business shirt was slid up far enough over his bicep to reveal the all-too-real souvenir Peeta had given Pauley all those years ago.
Does she still remember that incident?
Tom wondered to himself. That blonde little thing, with the bob cut, had some nerve. Tom had seen the home movie of that very day. Pauley's father had recorded his 6th birthday on one of those old Super 8 video cameras from the 70s. The ones that used a roll of film and had those scratchy lines when you watched it on a projector. It was only because Pauley's older brother had commissioned a specialist to convert all the film recorded to fit on Blu-ray for home viewing that Tom had seen it. Pauley at 6, wore a similar light blue collared shirt for his birthday to the one he was wearing right now. And Peta had pranced around the party table like some important little queen.
I doubt she remembers.
Pauley answered Tom's unspoken question. The knife incident was never caught on film, but Tom could feel the cut of the knife on his own arm as he looked at that scar. Tom shivered as he returned his hands to his mug. Pauley suddenly stood up out of his chair like a rocket, nearly startling Tom out of his chair and almost spilling what remained of his coffee.
It's 6:30.
Pauley announced, without looking at his watch. Tom looked over at the coffee house clock in alarm. Pauley was right. 6:30 on the dot.
How could he possibly know? Damn, he is trained well.
Tom surmised to himself.
It's time to go home, or there will be hell to pay.
Pauley said softly, while collecting his things. He then reached into his trouser pocket and switched off his vibrating phone.
So that's how he knew. He is trained well.
Tom thought to himself.
Coffee break's over, mate. See you tomorrow.
Pauley said, as he hurried out of the coffee shop.
See you tomorrow.
Tom answered, as he lingered. Tom's thoughts wandered through the scene of Pauley's story. The horror of it all. Would that be his turning point? Could he walk away from such a thing, or would he be as terrified, as unable to leave, as lost and hopeless? Marriage is supposed to be for life. Your partner is supposed to champion your strengths and guard you against weaknesses. Till death do you part. She's not supposed to use your weaknesses as a weapon against you. Is all this worth it? Tom nearly jumped out of his chair in fear at the tap 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 at the coffee shop window.
Oi, there will be hell to pay if you don't go home now, you fool.
Pauley mouthed through the window, pointing at his watch. Pauley was right. Without a further thought, Tom downed the rest of his coffee, scrambled his things together and hurried out of the coffee shop.
My name is Tom.
Tom mimicked Pauley as he left the coffee shop.
And I am a battered husband. It's been 15 days since my wife last assaulted me and threatened my life.